let's look at the foot in a little bit more detail. There are 26 bones in the foot and 30 bones in the entire leg. So 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30. If we translate that into joints, there are 32 joints in the foot, 37 joints in the entire leg. So if we look even more closely at the foot, at those 26 bones, we find that the bones come in 3 segments, 3 groupings of bones. I don't want you to try to get caught up in learning the names of all of the bones because they do have specific names. Let's keep it in sections. This group in the back of the foot, in the posterior section of the foot, are called the tarsals. Beyond the tarsals are what are known as the metatarsals. And if you look, there are 5 metatarsals. And beyond that are the phalanges, which make up the toes. If we look at the specific movements of the foot, the ankle actually is made up of 2 joints. At the first joint, which is where the tibia meets this bone, which is called the talus. So if we use our formula again, tibia plus O plus talus makes for the tibiotalar joint, is where we find the flexion and extension of the foot. Now this has a technical name. That is, this is called plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. The foot also turns inward and outward, which is similar to abduction and adduction. The movement inward is called inversion. The movement outward is called eversion. This sometimes gets mixed up with pronation and supination of the foot. Pronation and supination are similar movements, but incorporate movement of the entire foot. And so you normally use pronation and supination when talking about actual walking. So if we look at these movements in yoga poses, I'll give you a couple of examples. Let me put my leg down. If I go into a simple downward-facing dog, and you look at my foot, this is a dorsiflexed position of the foot and the ankle. This angle is dorsiflexed. If I go into an up dog, this is plantar flexion of the ankle. And so I move from plantar flexion to dorsiflexion. If I put a warrior in, I've now got a back foot that's inverted, that internal movement of the foot. And the last one, if I turn my feet out this way, and I go into a pose like this, the foot is now everted. If we look at the foot from an evolutionary perspective, there are 3 major changes that have happened. The first is we've lost a semi-opposable digit. So if you look at a primate and their foot or their back leg, they have a big toe that can help grasp things. So the toe has come in, and as a result, the second change is that the axis of the foot now sits directly through the second toe. And so you might have noticed that you have a second toe that's slightly longer. At least those of us on a more advanced stage of evolution do. So if yours is shorter, you're just a little further back. The third stage is a really important one that we're going to talk about, and that is the development in the arches of the foot. And I say arches plurally. Most people are familiar with the inside arch, and our word for inside is medial. So most people are familiar with the medial arch of the foot, but there are actually 3. So if you look at the bottom of the foot, we'll play connect the dots for a moment. The calcaneus, that's the heel bone, the base of the big toe, and the base of the little toe create 3 lines that delineate the 3 arches of the foot. So this is the medial side, known as the medial arch. The arch on the outside is known as the lateral arch, and there's also an arch that goes across between the big toe and the little toe, and this is called the transverse arch. Effectively, when you stand or you put weight on your foot gets both longer and wider at the same time. This is why when you were young and you went to get your feet measured for shoes, you would always do it standing up because your foot gets longer and wider as you place weight on it. There's two words I want to introduce to you, and that is mula and uddiyana. And they refer to the bandhas in the body. The bandhas are the energetic valves or lock. The mula bandha is related to the pelvic floor and the root chakra. The uddiyana bandha is related to upward flying energy, upward movement of energy. And if we take that concept and apply it to our foot, the medial arch of the foot would be uddiyana. It's lifted, right? It comes up. The mula quality is the part of the foot that goes down, that is attached to the floor, that's connected to earth and rooting. And so, in this microcosmic form, we want to balance out the qualities of mula and uddiyana. So in yoga, what's often talked about is engaging or lifting the arches of the foot. And the simplest way to do this is to lift the toes. Now, if you look closely at my foot, when I lift my toes, the tension of the tissues on the bottom of the foot have changed. If you look at this image of the plantar fascia, you'll notice that this layer of connective tissue runs from the very end of the toes over the ball of the foot, which is where the metatarsal meets the phalange, or the toe, and then down into the calcaneus, or the heel bone. And so as the toes lift, that piece of tissue will get stretched, and the heel and the base of the toe end up moving towards one another. And so by lifting the toes, I'm engaging the arch. Now, I can hold on to that because I'm also contracting the tissues in my foreleg. So if I hold on to that quality and that energy and place my toes down, I've got engaged tissues and an arch that is slightly lifted, as opposed to it being relaxed. So this comes in very handy in standing poses, because it's the standing poses that create our connection to earth, that root us to the ground. So the question is, what are the arches for? Outside of yoga, the arches create support, stability, balance, and the last one is actually adaptability. The foot has to change shape, even within our shoes. Our foot changes shape, and of course when we first developed these feet, we certainly weren't walking around on sidewalks or hardwood floors or concrete. And so our foot had to be able to adapt to uneven surfaces and structures, and they still do it. In yoga, all of those same things apply. In our standing poses, they create strength and stability, support, resiliency, and therefore adaptability as well. So let's talk about the foot as a foundation. And this is important. Because of gravity's constant effect on us, weight travels down through our body. If our foundation isn't set right, then things above it tend to get out of whack. If you think about a house foundation, if the foundation settles unevenly, that big crack, the foundation is always going to settle. But if it settles and that crack happens and the floor on one side is half an inch to an inch higher on the other side, you're going to get a certain amount of tension and torsion running through that structure. The door may not open and close, it may need to be planed, or the windows will get stuck closed or stuck open, just as a result of that tension. The same thing can happen in our own body, whether this is just postural, and if I line myself up for a moment, if you look at, because I've got my own pattern going on, if you look at my feet, I put the inside of my feet parallel to one another. And you might notice that my right foot, this bone, is falling in a little bit more than it is on that side. If you then follow that up to the next joint, that is the knee joint, you'll notice that my kneecap on the right side is pointing in more than on the left. And if I bend my knee, it becomes a little bit more obvious. And so the foundation has fallen, the knee has turned in, and the hip also is therefore rotated in slightly. This also has implications further up in my body, into my shoulders, and if I think about where tension lies in my body, it's all around this particular pattern on the right side of my body. We all have different patterns like this, but this one is specific to being around the foot. there are three components that create and maintain the arches of the foot. The first one is quite simply bone shape. And so the way our bones are naturally formed creates an arch. Actually, when we're born, we're all born without arches. But they develop as we start crawling around and placing our toes on the floor and pushing off and moving backwards and forwards and crawling around. Our arches start to develop. But of course, some people do have flat feet. And so flat feet are generally a genetic thing if it's since the beginning. If you never remember having arches, then it's genetic. It is also possible for people's arches to fall later in life, usually due to a trauma or some type of injury. So the first component is bone shape. That's at the base of it. The second component is the tension of the ligamentous structures that knit and tie all of these 26 bones together. So it's about connective tissue. The connective tissue surrounding the foot, and we'll see this image on the screen, those small ligaments tie these bones together and hold them together. And the third component is the intelligent connective tissue. That's what I call muscles, or the myofascia. So the muscular tissue, the myofascia of the lower leg, crosses the ankle joint, comes down and attaches to various places in the foot, and through its normal natural tension helps maintain the arches. So when somebody does lose an arch, 80% of the time it's a result of imbalance between those tissues. The good news is, on that point, that you can change the myofascia, you can change the muscles, you can stretch it or strengthen it to create that balance and bring back arches that have fallen. Let's take this into a practical pose such as side angle. I'm going to bend my right knee to 90 degrees. A tendency in this pose is for a lot of the weight and energy of the pose to be forward. And what I find is people need to actually bring that back a little bit. So we're going to use what we know about the foot to make that happen. So as I fall into the pose, I'm going to lift my toes, which engages all of the tissues in the shin, and as a result of that, it creates downward pressure through my foot, the ball of the foot and the heel in particular. And it just supports my knee moving back ever so slightly. So from the foot to the knee, I'm going to take that and bring that quality or energy into my back foot. And now I'm going to lift the toes of my back foot for just a moment to feel the whole leg activate, and then put the toes back down. And now I'm going to use that line to create the line of my left arm. And so the downward moving of the right foot, the downward moving of the left foot takes it out into my hand. Even where we line up our feet in relationship to one another is going to make a difference to what happens above it. Because, of course, the feet are foundation for our standing poses. And it's very common for people to want to line the center of the back foot up with the heel of the front foot and take that in this direction. Now, depending on the person, that's going to have a very significant effect on the hips and how they can move. If you have very open hips and movable hips, this alignment may not be a problem. For those of you with tighter hips trying to square them to the front, try taking that back foot out, it could be the front foot out, and working with just a smaller amount of tension in the hips so that your pelvis can be facing straight forward.